My presentation is meant as a lead-in. So if people stream in the middle of my presentation, it's not that big of a deal. Hopefully by the time we get to the real artists, we'll have, more or less everybody here. All right, so I'm gonna go ahead. Let's see if I can, I've never done a presentation here yet. So let's see, share screen, PowerPoint. All right, can you guys see my PowerPoint?
Yes.
Okay, all right, good. So basically, this is not a real presentation. I didn't record a video or anything. I was trying to get a third artist, but wasn't able to. And so I thought, well, I'll just do a little brief thing that talks about some of the stuff that I'm doing and why I think art needs to be a part of what SSoCIA is doing. I oftentimes start talks like this by talking about how weird I am and then talking about my interdisciplinary background, but my daughter bought me this sticker that I now have on my laptop. I'm not weird, I'm an artist. I'm not sure I'm really an artist yet, but I kind of like the thought. So I'm gonna stop saying I'm weird. You can insert that if you want to. There's also a Green Bank observatory sticker here, which I'll mention later on. Daniela and I went to a conference at Green Bank last year, and that gave me an idea for a work of art. The basic problem, it seems to me, that we in SSoCIA face is that the kinds of issues that we want to talk about are really very complicated. And as I tell students in my ethics classes, if you learn nothing else in this class, you need to understand that any issue in ethics that people talk about a lot is way more complicated than it seems at first blush, right? So your initial take is almost certainly wrong. But in true Dunning-Kruger fashion, people tend to have ethical positions and believe that they're great because they never really spend a lot of time reflecting on them. So the basic challenge we have is how to get people who, for example, are acknowledged experts in their own field of space science or whatever, to realize that they're not really thinking carefully enough about this stuff and to reflect more on it. And the general public is another audience that we need to impact. I think that art has an interesting potential here that is way underutilized. Visual images in particular tend to slip past critical barriers that we have in our neocortex. So when you talk or you write, that is processed by your neocortex, which has all these fancy tools for making sure that you don't believe things that are wrong. But when you watch a visual image, it's processed in the hind parts of your brain and by the amygdala first, and only later handed off to the neocortex. And so that has a real advantage in certain kinds of ways. It causes problems too, like people taking their character from their favorite TV show way too seriously. But when people see a visual image, it tends to strike them as real in a way that the spoken word does not. And art, visual art in particular, tends to be vague in the sense that it's hard to convey a very specific message, which is an advantage in the sense that it tends to sidestep people's defensive reactions. You're not telling someone they're wrong, you're just showing them a picture. And the right kind of picture can sort of make people say, that's interesting, and start thinking about it and maybe discussing it, which is the point. Like we're not necessarily trying to market a particular position. We're trying to motivate people to think a little bit more carefully about what's going on here and why it's going on. And so I actually think that SSoCIA probably needs art. And I'll say a word about that at the very end. So what am I talking about? I mean, it's easy to say these kinds of things, but I tend to be a concrete guy, despite the fact that I'm practicing as a philosopher. This is from William's presentation on the first day. I really like the idea here. It's the kind of thing I want to do, where it suggests something that causes people to reflect. The oil derricks on the moon. But those of you who watched the Chesley Bonestell video yesterday, one of the things I really like about him is he worked really hard to get the science right. So I like the idea here, but it bothers me to put oil derricks on the moon because that's, that makes that people might actually think maybe there's oil on the moon, and I don't want to have that conversation. So that's a little bit different from what I want to do. Now I will warn you, I've been doing art now officially for about a little bit more than a year, but in that time I've taken about one semester's worth of an art student's curriculum. So I make no contentions that my art is any good. Hopefully this presentation can be the before, And when people see a presentation I give in 10 years, they'll say, wow, Kelly's made a lot of progress. But I'm trying to give you an idea of what might be possible, not so much how to execute it. So here's some stuff I've done. This is from the very first art class I took, which is a graphic design class. It's the logo for a fictional corporation, the Lunar Mining Corporation. And again, there's no particular message here, but it's got all the elements of marketing and graphic design. And I think some people probably will find it vaguely disturbing to see, the possibility of a corporation dedicated to raping and pillaging the moon represented with a bright little logo that is supposed to make people feel good and stuff. And you get extra nerd points if you can explain to me what the line under the LMC is, but I won't get into that right now. So that's my first thing. I rather like this, although it's pretty simple. This is way more ambitious and ultimately taught me a whole lot about how not to do art. I really like the idea, but I need to execute it at a much larger scale with much better technique. I'll explain to you what it's supposed to be because it's not obvious. It's supposed to be the surface of the moon with Neil Armstrong's footprint there. And then in the foreground, you see a space-suited hand holding an iPhone. So the idea is to sort of make you think of a space tourist taking a picture of Neil Armstrong's foot. And then in the very lower right-hand corner, that's like one of these foil juice box pack things for tomato soup, which is supposed to be an homage to Andy Warhol. And it's got the Lunar Mining Corporation logo on it. It's got the ingredients in like 6 different languages. Aside from all the technical problems I had, the basic problem with this is the scale's wrong. The hand and the juice pack need to be much more subtle and a much larger composition so that when people look at it, it takes them a second to sort of figure out that these things are there. They're way too obvious in this piece. But again, I like the idea. And then this is from the class that I just finished. It's a printmaking class. So this is a print. I call it strategic marketing. And it doesn't require any explanation. This is something that came up earlier yesterday. We talked a little bit about putting ads on the moon. And again, I think this is a good example of you could write a paper on advertising and private property and people would read it. And I don't think that would have nearly as much of an impact on a lot of people as this one image. Now, the image could be better, but still, I think you get the right image. I think it can do an awful lot that words are not going to be able to do, or not as efficiently in any event. And then finally, I'll just give you a couple of ideas that I'm thinking about for next semester. So I spent time at the Green Bank Radio Observatory. Danielle and I went to a conference there, and they restrict all electromagnetic radiation. So no cell phones, no Wi-Fi. It's a weird experience. And that made me think a little bit about how we're all bathed in this electromagnetic radiation, but nobody's aware of it. And then when Sabina gave her talk about the UV stuff that I watched the other day, that really inspired me. So I'm gonna try to do something where there's a painting of a fairly humdrum, run-of-the-mill kind of landscape maybe, and then under UV light, you can see this weird electromagnetic world that's invisible to the naked eye. I have a lot of thinking about how to do this. I'm gonna talk to Sabina. I've talked to a couple of physicists about it. If you got ideas and you wanna play junior amateur artist, by all means, contact me. And the other one is what I call seasons. The idea is to have a circular canvas and paint a picture of the Earth, but it's divided into radial sections, and you have first a like lava Earth, which is during the late heavy bombardment, and then you have a snowball Earth, and then you have temperate Earth like modern Earth, and then you have post runaway global greenhouse Earth, which is like Venus. And the landforms are sufficiently similar that you can actually it sort of looks like a picture of the Earth, but with these different sections, and you could call them fall, summer, winter, autumn, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm gonna shut up now, and we've got no, we don't really have any time, so that's fine. Let me just suggest that one thing we might talk about either during the discussions for the real presentations or later on is how we want to integrate art into SSoCIA on an ongoing basis. Like what constitutes art? How do we do it? How do we get artists to come? This is a bit of a non-standard thing for artists, and so it's not a trivially easy thing to get artists to agree to come here. And then when they do come here, exactly what do we want them to do, et cetera, et cetera. So like I say, I'm gonna shut up now, and there's not really time to discuss this, which is fine because there's not a lot of content. we'll move straight into Sabina's thing. And if you really want to ask me questions, you can do that during the breakout at the end of this thing. All right.